After the groundbreaking GoldenEye on the N64, EA acquired the Bond license. Their first game was exclusively on the PS1 and was a third-person shooter. Originally, the game was meant to be a sequel to Tomorrow Never Dies, but later was changed to highlight the action moments from that movie. This first game by EA was very lackluster and not a good game. In 2000, EA planned on going even bigger with their Bond releases. In this year, they planned on releasing 3 different Bond titles. 2 of the games were going to be based on the World Is Not Enough film. There would be a version for the PS1 along with one for the N64. Each would be made by different developers to take advantage of the respective consoles' hardware. Then there was another Bond game that was going to be coming out around the same time. This one would be focusing on the driving elements of Bond rather than being a shooter. Join me as we take a look back at 007 Racing. Following EA's first Bond game with Tomorrow Never Dies, they decided to approach their next entries a bit differently. For The World Is Not Enough, they wanted to make exclusive versions of the game on different consoles as a means for those versions to fully take advantage of the hardware they would be on. This resulted in completely different versions of The World Is Not Enough to be developed for the PS1, N64, and then the PS2 by completely different teams. The PS2 version would later change into a completely different Bond game with Agent Under Fire, and Black Ops Entertainment would lead the PS1 development, with Eurocom leading the ship on the N64. At the same time, a completely different studio would be making a Bond game that would be focused on Bond's cars. After including a car stage within Tomorrow Never Dies, EA had the idea to explore this as a completely separate game. Throughout Bond's rich history, he has many different cars and features many exciting action sequences in them. The plan was to use a modified version of the Need for Speed engine for this game. The studio wanted to feature different iconic cars from the film along with different gadgets for the player to use. This meant that the cars from different eras would be featured within the game. Also, this would allow the gameplay to have a nice mix of racing along with car combat. The developers opted to tell an original story and look to the films for inspiration rather than doing a play-by-play of a movie. This resulted in some familiar villains from Bond's history that would show up in each of the levels. This title would be the first original Bond story by EA and started a trend for the next generation where the Bond games would not be based on Bond films. 007 Racing seemed to be an interesting concept to take the character in, while also helping to separate itself from other Bond titles at the time. In November 2000, 007 Racing was released to the world. 007 Racing is a driving game that focuses on different cars that Bond has access to throughout his different films. Sadly, this is going to be a mostly negative view on this game, as I never liked it when it originally came out, and I think it's even worse now. The concept of having a Bond game focused on the different Bond cars sounds like a pretty solid idea. There are many different cool set pieces in the films related to the different cars, whether this means the memorable chase that transitions to an underwater part in The Spy Who Loved Me, or the amazing action in the parking lot in Tomorrow Never Dies. There's a solid amount of scenes to use for inspiration for a game like this. But like I have said before in other videos, the talent is really not in the concept. It is in the execution, and here the execution is lackluster. The game starts off on a decent foot with a very short level where you need to rescue someone, shoot up some bad guys, and then escape. This isn't the best opening level to a game, but it does a decent job at potentially letting the player know what they can expect for the entire ride. The problem is that the longer you play the game, the more you will notice its issues. The second level is devoted to just racing as you try to collect parts and try not to slow down to prevent your car from blowing up. It is here where you will really notice notice how the driving feels way too loose. This results in driving gameplay that has you fighting the controls every step of the way to simply drive. And since the game is built on driving, this is a huge issue. If you are going to center your entire game around driving, you need to make sure that it feels pretty good to control and is not annoying to the player. The third mission features some more car combat, and you can see how the game lacks a lot of polish in this area. You need to blow up cars that are trying to ram you. Your machine guns will not hurt them, which is really odd, so you mainly need to rely on your missiles to blow them up. The problem is that the missiles are very inaccurate, resulting in you missing your target who is right in front of you, along with the splash damage from the missile that easily causes damage to your own car. Where the car combat should be a fun area of the game, this results in more frustration. As you keep playing, you will notice that you will receive a percentage at the end of each mission. If you do not achieve a certain percentage, even if you beat the stage, then you will fail the mission and need to play it over again before proceeding. This is really annoying, and it feels like it was put into the game to artificially make it more difficult. What would have been a better option would to allow the player to go to the next level after beating the one that they are on, and then using a bronze, silver, and gold system for unlocks. The game does have a decent mix of chase or escape-like sequences mixed with doing objectives. The high-speed situations are not that great since controlling your car is a chore, and the objectives are odd since it limits your speed and really slows you down. This doesn't feel like something that should belong in a car-focused game. Then there are other odd decisions, like one level where you need to fight off forklifts that cannot be damaged by any of your weapons, and you need to try to get them to hit these exploding boxes. This part is really dumb. Another part uses fixed camera angles where you need to do some objectives. The fixed camera angles makes controlling your car even harder. This level is trying to pay tribute to the part where Bond controls his car with his phone in Tomorrow Never Dies, but the execution is very poor here. In some ways, this is a great example of the entire game. Towards the end of the game, you need to dodge some lasers, but if you get detected, you pretty much die instantly. To the game's credit, there is a fun little CGI cutscene that plays at the end of the first level, along with one that closes out the game. And while the character models are kinda bad, the voice acting is so bad it's good, there is still some fun to these sequences. I do appreciate how the writers of the game tried to tell an original story, but they went with the lowest effort way to do it. Almost all of the story is provided to the player through walls of text rather than through those cutscenes. I understand that these sequences might be expensive to make, but the walls of text do not really fit a game of this type. Stopping to read the story would fit more in a moderately paced game like an RPG, but not here. This feels like another missed opportunity considering that there is a decent amount of fan service put into the story. Characters and villains from all different eras pop up and encounter Bond. It does feel more like a fan service mess rather than a well-done story, but all of this could have been told and presented a lot better. Another thing I want to make note of is how bad the soundtrack is in this game. Some of the tracks are decent, and then there are others that are really annoying versions of the Bond theme. So much so, I did not even feature any of the tracks in this video. When revisiting Tomorrow Never Dies for the PS1, the game was not very good, but the soundtrack was at least a bright spot. 007 Racing sadly does not have this at all. One of my biggest problems with the game is how there was this fun concept of a driving game around Bond, but here it seems like the developers didn't know how to properly implement this interesting idea. The game would have been a lot better if the controls were at least good, and it didn't feel like a chore to operate your different cars. You get to drive different Bond vehicles, but they all generally feel the same and are not fun to control. This is also another missed opportunity in having the attention to detail to make each vehicle feel unique. This could have been a good opportunity to give each vehicle some specific gadgets to them. Something else that I thought was odd was the lack of customization for your cars. I think simple options like changing the color of your vehicles or even toying around with some of the stats would have been a nice way for some player expression. In racing games, this is one of the best features about the good ones, how they let you personalize your own car. When the developers were making this, they had a bunch of racing games along with GoldenEye to pull from for their game. While GoldenEye is not a racing game, it does have an aspect about its design that could have enhanced 007 Racing. In GoldenEye, the objectives are different depending on the difficulty, and this relates to some of the in-game rewards to the player. This potentially could have been used in the design for 007 Racing. For one, it would promote replaying the game along with giving the player something else to earn with new rewards. Also, with this being a racing game and racing being in the title, there is not a lot of traditional racing featured here. In some ways, I feel like the game may have benefited in becoming a full-on kart racer, featuring different Bond cars, iconic villains and locations animations from the films along with the music. But anyway, with this being a racing game, it is odd that there isn't really any form of a free race mode. There are a few city-like locations used in some of the missions, but including an option to drive around the city as you please would have been a nice addition. This project does feel like it was really mismanaged, and what is really odd is why EA did not just give this project to the actual developers of Need for Speed. 007 Racing is a lackluster Bond game and not fun to play at all. 007 Racing is easily the worst Bond game on the PS1, along with one of the worst games in the series. I do think that this is a really fun concept that could make for a good video game, but this concept needed a team that could actually execute that well here. Again, if EA wanted to make a Bond racing game, then why not give that to the actual developers for Need for Speed? They would have been better equipped to make something better than what we got. The PS1 had a rough go when it came to Bond games, as Tomorrow Never Dies wasn't that good, and The World Is Not Enough could have been a lot better. But 007 Racing is easily the worst of the bunch. Thankfully, the PS2 era of Bond is where EA more than made up for these lackluster games. Along with this, the PS2 era featured some really exciting levels that fully captured the fun and spirit of driving in a Bond car. While 007 Racing was a low point in the series, the games to come were going to be some of my personal favorites in the franchise. If you are looking to play some of the really old Bond games, then stick to the N64, as GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough both play great and are still fun to play to this day. Only try 007 Racing if you are curious as to how bad it is. Thank you very much for watching.